My name's Abigail, and you're listening to Absolutely Me. Fun hearing yourself talk. I don't know if you feel like that. I'm like, maybe having a podcast is good for me because I like kind of like hearing myself talk.
I don't love hearing myself talk, but I think I'm pretty smart.
Yeah. So you're like, wow, I made a really good point.
No.
That's so funny. Oh man. Okay, well, Mackenzie, Sister Graham.
That's so weird.
I know, it's so weird to call you Mackenzie, though.
It's weird either way. I was telling my husband, I was like, I'm gonna go, you remember Abigail Hodgson? And he's like, huh? And I'm like, does she even go by Abigail? Does she go by Abby? I don't know.
I know, I was like, Mackenzie? I like had to look up how to spell your name because I was like, I don't know how to spell Mackenzie. I only know how to spell Sister Graham.
Graham's a lot easier to spell than Mackenzie, although it's not self-explanatory either.
I know. Well, if you people listening couldn't tell, Mackenzie and I know each other because we used to be mission companions for only 6 weeks, right?
I was actually really sad about that when I got transferred away. I was really sad.
Yeah, I can't believe it's been 5 years since we were companions.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It is crazy. A long time. And we're continuing some mission trends. We used to go every single day to McDonald's and get a Coke for Mackenzie and a Dr. Pepper for me, and we both have our little sodas together.
Yeah.
We're both addicted, and it's fine. We support each other in our soda addictions.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the worst thing to be addicted to, right?
There's much worse things, but yeah, I can't believe it's been 5 years. That is like so wild to me.
It is kind of crazy.
I know, it feels like it wasn't, like, I mean, it was the very end of my mission. It was my second to last transfer, so to me, it felt like a long time. Mm-hmm. To you, it was probably a lot quicker. Seemed like a lot quicker.
Like 5 years,
or like the time that we were actually companions, like, yeah, like the 6 weeks.
I don't know. I think it was a combination of the two.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. Yeah.
I just remember I was like, oh my gosh, I am ready to go home, and it felt like 1,000 years that I was in my last area. So it felt like a long time. But also I wanted to bring up, and I already mentioned this to you, but I make in my sleep what my friends and family lovingly refer to as the grudge noise.
You do indeed.
And I didn't know that this was an issue until I was like most of the way through my mission. Nobody had really told me before. And I remember I went to like a leadership meeting, and like 5 of my companions were there at the leadership meeting, and somebody mentioned my grudging in my sleep, and all 5 of them went, yes, I dealt with that for so long. And I was like, how come nobody told me? Like, none of you told me that this was an issue.
By the time we were companions, you already knew it was an issue.
Yes.
And so I got the warning.
I warned you. Yes, I warned you.
It was like, sometimes I make grudge noises. Don't worry. It's okay. I think you said sometimes you talk in your sleep, too, which you definitely did. It was pretty funny.
I still can't believe that. She was just telling me before we started recording, she remembers me talking about the Bountiful Temple in my sleep.
Like I said, I think it was like just within the first few weeks of us being together, and so you're in a new area, and so everybody's, where are you from? Well, I'm from Centerville, and then there was some temple being built that was, North Salt Lake somewhere, and everybody kept asking if that was going to be your temple, and you were like, no, my temple's the Bountiful Temple, it's going to keep being the Bountiful Temple, and then in your sleep you were saying something, Trey, Bountiful Temple, and I was like, oh, there it is.
Oh my gosh, that's how you know that I was deep into the mission mind frame. That's what I was dreaming about.
I also remember you saying your spirit, well, you were like a dog.
Uh-huh.
And if you were a dog, you were a golden retriever.
In my sleep, I said that? Oh.
This is while you were awake.
Oh,
and
yeah.
wanted your hair played with.
Yes, that is true.
So funny.
That is true. I do love that. I like being pet and scratched my back and played with. Yeah, that is true.
Do you remember when we wrestled?
Yes. I think that was good for us. We got out some aggression.
Oh my gosh, I just remember our neighbors downstairs were not pleased with us, and my back was so sore the next morning because I'm not very big. I'm not a brawler, guys.
No, I know. I'm like a foot taller than you. I totally forgot that we even did that.
Yeah,
Did we do that
great.
just like for exercise, or like what did we just do that for fun?
I think we just did it for fun. It was only like once or twice.
We just had some aggression, apparently. We needed to get out and we're like, let's wrestle each other. Oh my gosh, I forgot that we did that. But yeah, that's how Mackenzie and I know each other. We were mission companions, and I terrorized her life for 6 weeks.
You were so great as a companion. One of my favorites.
Oh, you're so
It
nice.
was not terror at all.
That's good. That's nice. I feel like looking back on my mission, I need to have some other companions on the podcast. You're my first companion on the podcast.
Special.
You are. And but I was like, I need to have some more companions on the podcast, because I feel like to actually talk about the mission, because I feel like I was so deep into the mission mindset. I was deeply in there.
You were, but you weren't inconsiderate of other people in their agency. Like
That's
some
good. That's good to know.
Because that's a pet peeve of mine.
Yeah.
Just because most of my family are not members of the church.
Yeah.
My mom joined the church when she was in high school, and so, none of my grandparents are members or aunts or uncles or anything like that. And so I don't know. I never went into the mission with the mindset of everybody's wrong and needs to be baptized, and I know so much better than everybody else, and it really irritated me when other missionaries weren't respectful of other people saying no.
Yeah. Which you were not. You did not like that, and it was good. We got along really well, though. We got along really well.
We did get along.
Yeah,
really
we got along great, and it was great. It was a fun time. It was a good way to end the mission. But I wanted to have Mackenzie on here because we have a very special topic to talk about today, which we are both, I wouldn't maybe consider ourselves experts, but maybe consider us semi-experts.
I think it's lived experience.
Yeah.
Less than being experts.
Mackenzie much more than me. She's been in it a lot longer than I was.
I don't know that I would say much more. I think it's just a different situation, a different role.
It's true. That is true. But we wanted to, oh, sorry, that's my chair squeaking. I'm going to have to edit that out. We wanted to talk about narcissism.
Yes.
So, I was just going to have Mackenzie tell us. She has a very unique situation. We all know about my situation with my ex and being in an abusive relationship, and he was hands down a narcissist, no question about it. And Mackenzie's in a unique position because her dad is a narcissist.
Yeah, pretty sure. My dad has not been formally diagnosed with anything, although I think he should be.
Yeah.
So my, I guess, assumption of that is, one, family members who've gone to therapy and met with therapists and talked about our family trauma from my dad, and the therapist's conclusion was actually that my dad's a psychopath.
Awesome.
But I look at, the diagnostic manual that therapists use, and there's some overlap. They're kind of in the same family of disorders.
Yeah.
But I look at the psychopath and the narcissistic personality disorder, like, traits.
Yeah.
And narcissism, I just check.
Yeah.
Almost every single box.
Yeah. That's how I felt with my ex too. Like, he's never been formally diagnosed. I don't think ever will go to a doctor and get formally diagnosed.
Most narcissists won't.
Yes. But just same, like, talking to, like, my therapist and hearing, and she's kind of a professional with that kind of aspect of personality disorders, so I trust her opinion. And just like you said, every video I've ever watched about narcissists, every like article I've read, it's just the same. Check, 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 check. So I just wanted Mackenzie to kind of tell us her story about her dad, and we're going to just go through her life and talk about her relationship with her dad a little bit, and then we'll talk also just about narcissism in general. So Mackenzie, do you want to tell me what it was like growing up with your dad?
I think that's just kind of an interesting question, because my parents were married until I was 19.
Yeah.
But my dad worked out of state most of my growing up. So from the time that I was 6 until I was, 19 and my parents divorced, my dad was really only home on weekends.
Yeah.
He was really only around Friday night, Saturday, Sunday, and maybe like a Monday morning. But he really wasn't present. Mm-hmm. I think something that after my parents divorced and kind of, we had a little catastrophic event that kind of was a little bit of a breaking point in our family. After that happened, I realized I really didn't know my dad at all. Mm-hmm. And it's hard because it wasn't like we didn't spend time together. It's that we didn't spend quality time together, like getting to know each other. So most of our time spent together was seeing movies and like going out to eat, and it just was low pressure for him. He didn't have to get to know us. I remember being really irritated in like elementary school because it was a big deal what your favorite color was, and my dad never knew my favorite color. He never knew my favorite color, never knew like what movies I liked to watch or what TV shows I liked to watch. I think if you asked my dad, like, oh, who's Mackenzie? What does Mackenzie like to do? He'd say, oh, Mackenzie likes to read. Mackenzie's very sweet. But he wouldn't really have much to say about my substance as a person.
Yeah.
And everybody knows I like to read. I was, as a kid, always on the couch with a book in my hand.
Yeah.
I'd read for hours on end. It's not a badge of accomplishment to be like, oh, Mackenzie likes to read.
Yeah. That was, like, obvious to everybody in your life.
Yeah. I changed my favorite color to my dad's favorite color in elementary school in the hopes that my dad would remember my favorite color was the same as his favorite color.
Yeah.
He did not. He did not remember, which, is kind of a stupid, inconsequential thing, but it was irritating, or maybe a little more upsetting would probably be the better word to me in elementary school, because it was something that was important to me, even if it wasn't important to my dad.
Yeah, he just had, like, very little emotional commitment.
Yeah, very little emotional connection or feedback, anything like that.
Yeah. And that's a very common thing with narcissists, and we'll get into this a little bit more later, but just like the lack of emotional connection or like even emotional interest in people around them. Just like had none of that. Do you remember as a child, like if you had anything that struck you as strange where you were like, this doesn't seem normal in compared to like my friend's parents?
To be honest, there wasn't a lot specific when I was like really young growing up. I think a lot of the realizations came later on as I learned kind of more about narcissism, learned more about I like a normal, healthy family dynamic. I think a mission actually really helped with that, because you spend so much time in other people's homes. You see what normal families function like, and I realized my family did not function at all normally.
Yeah.
And I think I knew that to an extent. Like, it was weird, first of all, that my dad was out of town so much, that he really wasn't around.
Yeah.
And then my parents, I don't want to say they fought a lot, but they disagreed a lot. And my dad was not very respectful of my mom when they disagreed. He just kind of would decide and do whatever he wanted, regardless of how my mom felt about things.
Yeah.
But looking back as an adult, there are actually some things that kind of have stood out to me. Like I remember I want to say I was like a freshman in high school, and most teenagers, kind of butt heads with their parents, and I was butting heads with my mom.
Yeah.
And that makes sense. She was the primary caregiver in my home. What other adult did I have around to butt heads with other than my mom?
Yeah. And like you said, normal teenage parent relationship.
Yes, for sure. And my dad, took me out, and he was trying to I guess, kind of like getting good with me. You know, it was, well, your mom doesn't understand you, but I do. And he was pushing, my dad fancies himself an artist, which is just really laughable because he's not. And so he was trying to really push, like, oh, well, you're a creative like I am, and I'm so not a creative. I'm just very black and white, and this is the way things are. I'm very much my mother's daughter. And so it just was funny that he had that perspective, that he was trying that. It just didn't work.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. There was another thing that I was thinking. Oh, my parents had their finances commingled for a little while.
Yeah.
When I was young, and that quickly, well, I don't want to say quickly, it lasted for a while, and then my mom got really frustrated about when I was like probably elementary school age, because my dad would not pay our bills, and our power would get turned off, or our water would get turned off because my dad was irresponsible.
Yeah.
And so my mom finally separated their finances, and she took over all of the household bill. And so she paid like our mortgage payments and our utilities, and made sure that we had like clothes for school and stuff like that, because my dad was just so irresponsible, and it was about him saving face to his clients more than like providing for his family.
Yeah. He just wanted to look good in front of people and clients, and yeah.
Yeah, so that was interesting. The other thing too is my dad, I want to say like almost kind of tried to buy our friendship from like, buy our loyalty from like me and my siblings. And so it was like ridiculous shopping trips, ridiculous expenses that he had no business incurring, and it was all status.
Yeah.
And buying a friend.
Yeah, which is also another trait of narcissists, is just being consumed by status.
Material things.
Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, there's grandiose narcissism. There's different types of narcissists, and my dad is very much a grandiose narcissist. He wants everybody to think he's the best at everything, regardless of whether or not that's actually true.
Yeah. That's so interesting, like, and because, like we mentioned, our relationship dynamic with, the narcissist in our life were different. Yours was your dad, mine was my husband. Do you feel like, because for me, I was, like, the primary target of his rage and different things. Did you feel like your mom was, like, more the primary target than you guys?
My mom was definitely the primary target. I think a lot of that had to do with how little he was at our home.
Yeah.
And I think my mom, in a lot of ways, kind of shielded us from a lot of things. There's this kind of dynamic from what I've read about narcissists, where typically in family systems, there's a golden child.
Yes.
And there's a scapegoat.
Yes.
And it kind of can change over time in your family dynamic. And so I feel like my mom, most of the time, would have fit the role of the scapegoat. Anything that went wrong was my mom's fault. It was never my dad's fault. My mom never supported my dad and his interests and his hobbies and his ludicrous stuff that he did.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know that I would say that we had a really, like, a golden child, but he's tried to put us all in that role at one point or another. So I know that he's written letters to my sister that are, you know, nobody loves me, nobody cares about me, you're the only person I can trust and rely on.
Yeah.
He sends me the same letters. It's, you know, and I wonder sometimes if he just thinks I'm stupid, like if he doesn't realize that we all talk to each other.
Yeah.
But he tries to very much, like, pit us against each other, or, like, position us as his emotional support, which is an inappropriate role for us to be in.
Yeah.
In a parent-child dynamic.
Yeah. That's so interesting, too, like, thinking about your mom, like, shielding you guys. Did you ever witness your dad? You said you saw them, like, kind of butt heads. Mm-hmm. Did you ever see any sort of, like, abuse towards your mom? Or did you ever witness that?
There was never, like, physical violence or anything of that nature. But my dad was very emotionally manipulative.
Yeah.
And his MO was a lot of spiritual abuse.
Yes.
And so he would take gospel topics and just twist them and twist them and twist them. So my mom was, an awful mother. She was the one who was going to be holding us back from heaven, and she was setting a poor example for us because she drank caffeine, which is just so ridiculous.
Yeah.
And my dad had twisted her so much that she thought when she filed for divorce from my dad that she was going to be, excommunicated or face disciplinary action from the church, which it's not what happens.
Yeah.
People divorce all the time, and there's no disciplinary action.
Yeah.
But he had twisted just the gospel doctrine so much. He claimed to have, prophetic visions and, just nonsense like that.
Really?
Yes. And it's so funny because I think, as a kid, he didn't tell me. He saved his really grandiose claims for my mom. But he had a journal of, his prophetic stuff for our family, which is so not normal.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
It's very odd and bizarre. But he, very much portrayed himself as being spiritually superior to just about everybody. I forgot where I was going with this.
He was just, spiritually manipulative and abusive that way.
So abusive. And so, in his mind and the way that he portrayed it, my mom was the one who was spiritually deficient. And again, my mom was a convert to the church when she was 17. She said she loves BYU because BYU is where she says she learned to be a Mormon. It's where she learned all the lingo and what family home evening was and the culture of being a member of the church, less so than the doctrine, because there's very much a cultural element of being a member of the church.
Yeah.
And my dad, was this returned missionary who was supposed to be so wonderful. He was sort of raised in the church. His parents kind of went in and out of activity. But he had more more cultural knowledge of the church than my mom did, and portrayed it as he had more spiritual knowledge as well, which was not true. And
used that probably as kind of a way to put himself above your mom, kind of put himself on a pedestal a little bit, I imagine.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and not even with just my mom, it was in church too. He had to have the best lessons, the best talks, the most intriguing things. He was really miffed because when we lived in Vegas, my dad was a member of the bishopric for a hot minute, and then he never really had high-profile callings in church after that. And he was always miffed because he was, the music director or whatever, and he thought he should be in more of a leadership role in the church.
Did he, ever express those things, do you know, to, people in the church, or was it just, to your family that he would express those things?
I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
I know it was a sentiment that was expressed to my family, but I don't know if it extended beyond that.
Because I know with a lot of narcissists, their home life and their out-of-home life is extremely different. And, the personas that they put on, it's, they come home and they take off this mask, and then they go out into the world, and it's just a completely different person. And I know you were saying your dad definitely did that with clients, and I know when we were companions you mentioned that he would kind of be grandiose at church a lot too, and try and get people to think he was really spiritual. And
my dad was very charismatic, very charming, and so I don't want to say people were easily fooled, but I think people just lacked the context of knowing better.
Yeah.
And so my dad, like I said, portrayed himself as being really skilled, really knowledgeable. My dad would offer legal advice to people in fields of law he didn't practice in. Which, I ask my mom stuff, and she, if she doesn't practice that field of law, she doesn't practice that field of law. She's like, well, from what I remember in law school, it's this, but if you really want expert advice, you should pay an attorney who practices that field.
Yeah.
To give you the expert advice.
Yeah. Which is probably normal for...
Which is normal.
Yeah.
It's like going to, an orthopedic surgeon and asking them to look at your heart.
Yeah.
They don't know, they know some stuff, but they're not in the nitty-gritty every day doing that. So it's just really funny, the things that my dad would say and do. He always had to have the new car, the nice car. You know, it had to be showy and flashy. My mom wanted nice things, but I think my mom was much more of a realist about it.
Yeah.
And my dad was very much over the top. You know, we had to have the best, we had to have the nicest.
That grandiose,
That grandiose personality where everything he does has to be the best, the greatest, the biggest.
Yeah. Do you remember did you see that shift from your home life to your outside world? And, like, do you remember thinking, like, oh, he's kind of a different person at home?
I don't know that I ever really thought a ton about it, just because, one, he wasn't home all that often.
Yeah.
And two, I just was like, oh, he's having adult conversations with adult people, and that's different than, you know, talking to your kids at home. But my dad was just not really engaged at home either.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know. I don't know that I really thought a ton about it.
There's a huge difference. Yeah. I know that that's a very common thing, like we mentioned, with narcissists, and with my husband, with people that he knew in his life, like his family, he was the same to them as he was to me, and did not treat them very well, and treated me really poorly in front of them and really poorly in front of my family. But if it was anybody outside the immediate family system, he was a completely different person, and, like, would put on a show for everyone else, and then would get, I like, had a hard time understanding, like, why are you so nice to these people when we, like, go out, and then we, like, get in the car, and he's, like, immediately yelling at me, you know? And that was just, like, the contrast was, like, so stark to me.
They're really good at masquerading.
They really are.
What they think people should see.
Yeah. And I kind of, to your point of, too, when you said that he was really charming and people didn't really know the context to know better, I feel like narcissists are very good at that first impression, right? Like, they're generally pretty charming people. Like, that's how they kind of draw people in, and they're generally really confident because they just are delusional in their mind about themselves, and they just kind of really draw people into them a lot. And it's hard for people, if you don't have that immediate relationship and you're around them all the time, to differentiate that. Mm-hmm. And so I'm sure people, like, looking in on, like, your mom and dad's relationship especially, probably were like, what, he's a narcissist? Like, we've never seen that before.
People, I think, are very shocked, I think, in some ways. Like, my parents, after they divorced, people would come up to my mom all the time, how's Rob doing? You know, is he okay? Mm-hmm. And my mom would be like, I haven't talked to him in years.
Yeah.
You know, she's no contact with my dad, and I think that's a good choice for her.
Yeah.
And it was really upsetting to her that people kept asking her about my dad.
Yeah.
You know, especially after, you know, all of the years of mistreatment she endured. You know, that they would, you know, she's like, how am I doing? You know, I've suffered so much. I've been through so much, and I'm finally free, I think, in her perspective of, you know, such a domineering personality, and all people can ask her is, how's Rob doing?
How's Rob doing? Yeah. That is so interesting, too. Like, his people, it like, I was listening to a podcast about narcissism recently, and they said it can often take, like, 1 to 2 years for people to recognize that somebody's a narcissist. And so it is interesting, like, seeing people just, like, on the periphery of narcissists' lives, maybe, like, coworkers or, like, people at church that don't know them really well have this, like, high view of who they are, and, like, look at them and maybe not put them so much on a pedestal as they want them to put them up, but they're just, like, these great people to the outside world. And then it's just, like, the people who are actually in the relationship with this narcissist get that mask off, and it's just a completely different experience.
Right. Well, I think most people wouldn't have looked at my parents' marriage and been like, oh, that's an abusive relationship.
Yeah.
And it took me years to even come to that realization myself. And my siblings disagree with me. They don't think that my parents were in a narcissistic, abusive relationship at all.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. And I think it's, part of it's I'm the oldest child. So I don't know if it's just that I am old enough to have more memories of, when we were really little than my siblings were, or if they just... it's hard too because it's our dad, right? You think you want to believe most of the time the best about your parents, and even people who aren't, growing up in abusive relationships or abusive family systems, there comes a point where you realize that your parents don't walk on water. They're not perfect. Yeah. And I think just for my family, it's been a little more jarring, and I don't think my siblings are wrong or bad for wanting to kind of preserve their memory of my dad in a better way than I do.
Yeah, that makes sense. And oldest daughter, you kind of got a lot of information, behind the scenes information that your other siblings didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that makes sense too. Do you want to kind of tell us about you mentioned this earlier, the breaking point with your family. When were your parents separated?
They were separated. The timeline is actually kind of crazy. So like I said, my dad lived in Vegas predominantly most of the time and was only home on the weekends. We sent, I guess in about August of, that would have been 2016. Uh-huh. My mom was very much pushing for me to get out of the house. I'd come home from my freshman year at SUU, and I knew I was going to go on a mission, but I wasn't quite ready yet. And my brother was about to leave. And she was kind of pushing me out of the house. She wouldn't say directly what was up, but she was like, there's some financial things going on. You should, try and fly the coop. And I was like, why? Why would I leave home?
Yeah.
I'm fine.
Yeah.
I'm going on my mission in just a few months. It's fine. So my mom kicked my dad out of the house in August, which she kind of hid from us kids. Mm-hmm. It was, dad's facing financial issues at work. He needs to spend more time in the office. He can't be coming back and forth. And so, we all kind of bought into that because my dad's life was his job. He wasn't home a lot.
Yeah.
So he left. We took my brother to the MTC in September, and then I didn't really see my dad again for a while. November came, and it was Thanksgiving, and we went down to my grandparents' house so that my mom could kind of talk through her exit strategy. And she had already told my dad that their marriage was over. But my dad was just kind of clinging on to things. So he came home over Thanksgiving, and had a meal with my mom's mom, my maternal grandmother. And it was like his last supper. He's having all of these epiphanies and things with my grandma. He told my grandmother that he never really wanted kids. It would have been really nice if he and my mom could have just been empty nesters forever and never had children. And my grandma was like, that's Linda's whole life. She's wanted to have kids, you know, and that's not what you portrayed to her when you guys got married. I'm adopted, so I think it's pretty hurtful that he would have been happy never having me.
Yeah.
So he had some revelations like that. He was supposed to move his stuff out. He didn't really. And then my mom came home with us, and we were in the newspaper a couple short days later. My dad was stealing money from his clients, a pretty significant amount of money, and he is now in prison for that, which is deserved.
Yeah, and that happened in 2016, you said?
2016. He wasn't formally arrested until, I think, January of 2017. But yeah, I think he was sentenced while I was out on my mission. I can't remember the exact day or year because I was not home.
Yeah, which is crazy that you were dealing with that when you were on your mission.
I mean, yes and no. I think it gave me more of a framework, I think, to kind of work through some things separate from my family. I had a hard time on my mission with just like for a transfer or so, and our mission president was like, maybe you should meet with a therapist. I I just don't think it was the right therapist for me.
Yeah.
And I just remember being really irritated because he assumed that I had gone on my mission to escape my family situation. And I was like, this decision was made years ago, prior to everything happening with my dad. If anything, I went on my mission in spite of everything that happened with my dad.
Yeah.
Because it would have been very easy for me to stay home and be like, my family needs me. I need to be here for support from my mom. And instead, I chose to go on a mission. I think it did help create some separation, so I could process separately. Because when I was home, it just was so much all at once that I just couldn't process. And so I even remember, like, my interview with my bishop before I came out. He's like, you need to, like, really face your emotions and how you're feeling about your dad. And I was like, yeah, no thanks.
Yeah.
And luckily, I think he forgot. He didn't bring it up again, which was great for me. But I think I kind of think of it like little boxes. I just take a little bit out of the box at a time.
Yeah.
And I think now, I mean, there's still days where it's really hard, but, you know, I used to not be able to tell my story about my dad without crying, because it was just so emotionally raw and traumatic.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I still cry every once in a while about my dad just because I'll never have a normal father-daughter relationship with my dad.
Yeah.
He's not capable of that. And I think in some ways that's hard, but it's not to the point of, you know, me crying forever.
It's not like causing you emotional distress like it was.
Yeah, not like it was.
Yeah.
It just, it was interesting. I realized I have a little boy. Mm-hmm. I realized when I was pregnant with him, you know, I would shield and protect him from anything. And my dad wouldn't offer the same courtesy to me. He didn't. You know, he didn't shield or protect us from anything. So, you know, that was a hard realization, I think, in some ways.
And you just kind of grieving the loss of that relationship and realizing that it was different, like you said, and it wasn't going to be normal. And
it'll never be normal. You know, it's grieving for something you never really had. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of perpetual, too. You know, there's little things like, oh, my dad's not able to be at my wedding. I'm not able to have a father-daughter dance with my dad. Not that I really want him there anyways, but it's something that I can't even have if I wanted it.
Yeah, which is difficult.
Yeah, just what it is.
Yeah, how do you view your relationship with your dad now? Like, what's the dynamic like now that he's in prison?
I say that it's my act of service to talk to my dad.
Yeah.
I go back and forth all the time about just cutting contact and moving on. But because I am an empathetic person, even though my dad is not, I know that if I were in that situation, I would feel really sad and lonely.
Yeah.
If nobody talked to me. And so I do periodically talk to my dad. He is able to write letters and make phone calls from prison. It's varied in regularity, just depending on what the prison situation is like at the time. It sometimes is like once a week, sometimes it's like once a month.
Yeah.
I actually prefer once a month or rare.
Yeah.
And he sends letters that are quite honestly insane. I get a little bit less of the crazy on the phone, and I think a lot of it is because I'm able to kind of direct the conversation in some ways.
Yeah.
If he gets onto a topic I'm not interested in talking about, I just don't give him the feedback, and I change the topic.
Yeah.
I think it's worked because, one, he's not physically here.
Yeah.
I think if my dad were physically around, it would be a lot harder. And I actually have a lot of fear about, you know, if he's alive and gets out of prison, what that will look like for me.
Yeah.
Because I don't want him around my family.
Or around your new family, your husband and your son, yeah.
And so I'll have to cross that bridge when we get to it. But I I talk to him periodically, but it's my act of service. You know, you learn how to navigate that complex relationship without really being detailed, really giving the emotional input. You know, most of my conversations with my dad are him talking about whatever he's doing, which is usually stuff that I just think is hilarious.
Mm-hmm.
'Cause it's just so ludicrous. He's taken up painting.
Yes.
He is writing books and memoirs that apparently I get the rights to when he dies, which I don't particularly want.
Good for you.
I don't particularly want
so
those.
exciting for you.
So it's really usually pretty brief on the phone. It's, you know, hey, how are ya? What's up? And we keep it brief.
Yeah.
The letters vary in length. So his letters, the most recent one I got was 20 pages and actually made me really mad. So I probably will not be talking to my dad for a little while, just because I think it's good to remind him that I have boundaries. And I think that's another part of why I've been able to have a sort of semi-functional communication with him. He used to be very disrespectful of my boundaries growing up. I just really dislike his parents. I think that they are honestly probably just about as bad as he is.
Yeah.
They're not good people. And I just got bulldozed all the time as a kid. You know, I didn't want to invite them to graduation, for my high school graduation, and my dad bulldozed me and did that anyways. They didn't come, thank goodness, but it wasn't because I wished it was because they weren't available.
Yeah.
They're awful people, and so my dad used to give out my phone number and my address to them. And so my condition of talking to him is he's not allowed to give out my phone number or my personal address to anybody.
Yeah.
And the day that he does is the day I stop talking to him. And I think he knows that I'm really serious about that. And so he hasn't pushed that yet. Every once in a while he'll bring it up. Like his biological mother, I haven't talked to since I was like 12. And that was her choice, which is just another whole box of worms. But he asked me a couple years ago, you know, if I would be interested in talking to her and if he could pass my phone number along. And I said, no. I said, you can give me her number, and if I'm interested, I'll reach out, which I never have because I'm not interested.
Mm-hmm.
She decided when I was 12 she didn't want a relationship with me. Why would I be interested in having a relationship with her now?
Yeah.
And I don't know that she really wants one. I think my dad's pushing it. So, you know, it's just I have very firm boundaries, and for the most part, he's respectful, other than, you know, the crazy nonsense letters that he sends me that I mostly just ignore.
Yeah. You said they're kind of like manifestos.
Oh, they're absolutely like manifestos.
Yeah.
They never directly address what he's done. It's always my financial shortcomings or my financial choices. I'm like, you stole millions of dollars that weren't yours.
Yeah.
From people who deserved better and should have been protected from somebody like you.
Yeah.
It's just ridiculous. And then I was telling you shortly before this about, you know, my mom told him when she stopped talking to him, she's done. They were on their way to divorce long before this happened. And my dad is still playing dumb 5 years later. And like, why doesn't your mom talk to me? And we're supposed to be an eternal family. And I've never violated my covenants. I'm like, you did, Dad. You stole millions of dollars. You got excommunicated from the church for your choices. You're not able to have that promise anymore. It's just really funny. He's not one of the qualities that is kind of shows narcissism or psychopathy is a lack of empathy. Mm-hmm. My dad has no empathy for the people that he's harmed, you know, his hundreds of victims, his family. It's all about him.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting, too. You were telling me a little bit before we started recording, too, that there's been a lot of things that you have come to learn since your dad's gone to prison about your dad that kind of like sheds light on the fact that he is a narcissist? Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I'm trying to remember what specifically I told you.
About
what I said?
You talked about like affairs.
Oh.
And like gambling, like you mentioned that you heard like rumors about everything under the sun.
Yeah, I heard rumors, I mean, for years, even before my dad was arrested, you know, that my dad was gay, that my dad had affairs, that my dad had gambling addictions, drug addictions, all sorts of stuff. And I don't know if any of it's true. I don't know that it really matters.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, my dad's an immoral person. He thought it was okay to steal millions of dollars that wasn't his from people who were supposed to be, you know, he was supposed to represent them and help them. And instead he harmed them and only benefited himself.
Yeah.
So, you know, like I was telling you, my dad has admitted to emotional affairs at this point, and the story changes every time. You know, at first it was, I've never violated my covenants. I've never done anything but love you, you know, to my mom. And then it was, well, I had the opportunity to leave you because there was, you know, something better. There was another woman. But I never left you because I decided I should, you know, stick to my covenants and be a righteous priesthood holder, and just really laughable. And it was supposed to, I think, make my mom feel like she was so, you know, special and wonderful that he had chosen her, which it had the opposite effect. It was, you've chosen me out of obligation and not out of love.
Yeah. Because that doesn't make you feel good.
Right. You know, it's just, like I said, it doesn't really matter at this point what he did or what he didn't do. The reality is he was an immoral person who made immoral choices and lacked just, you know, basic ethics in all sorts of aspects of his life, and I don't know what that extends to or doesn't extend to, but the truth of the matter is my dad is not somebody that can be trusted.
Yeah. And that's a hard reality to come to terms with.
I mean, it is and it isn't. It probably was at first.
Yeah.
Like I said, you know, I think I had just a lack of ability to process the emotional turmoil, but it's just, you know, been slowly over the years. I think as I've come to understand narcissism, it doesn't justify what he did in any way, but it helps me understand maybe some shortcomings that he's had that, you know, enabled him to make wrong choices.
Yeah.
So I think something that's really interesting that I've heard is that narcissists are made, not born. I think that there probably is a combination of things that happen that, you know, create a narcissist, but their own family dynamics are something that contribute. So I have no contact with my grandparents because they're awful people.
Yeah.
I know that my dad was neglected as a child. You know, he stole from the grocery store, from the gas station down the street in order to have food to survive, because he was left alone for long stretches of time with no adults checking in on him.
Yeah.
And so, you know, again, not that that justifies his behavior, but I think at some level as a child he was forced to make decisions that were immoral in order to survive. And that doesn't in any way justify the fact that he stole millions of dollars. That, you know, that wasn't survival. Yeah. That was ego and pride and narcissism.
Yeah. But it is interesting, like, getting some context into narcissists into narcissists' lives. Mm-hmm. And because kind of same thing, and like my ex was very had a very tumultuous growing up, and hearing about like family dynamics as they were growing up, and like you said, it didn't justify things, but it did put things into context for me a little bit more. And looking back to, I'm able to like not let him off the hook at all, but just kind of be like, you know, this is just like the reality of the situation. Right. Like, and it helps me put things into context more and be like, okay, well, and obviously just because somebody's a narcissist doesn't mean they can't make a good decision. Like, it's still like a conscious bad decision that they're making, and they know that what they're doing is wrong in their head most of the time. But just knowing, like, kind of what led up to the person that they are at the time of like their relationship with you, I think helped me and realize, like, it's not so personal.
Right. Well, it allows you to offer, I guess, some grace in a way. You know, it's not, like I said, not justification or excusing their behavior, but it's an understanding of maybe where they've come from.
Yeah.
You know, like I said, I would never say, oh, Dad's a good person. My dad is not a good person. He's a very, you know, I don't want to say evil, but a very immoral person.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want any of my friends to cross him on the street.
Yeah.
Quite honestly.
Yeah.
But knowing what I know, I think, you know, maybe I have a little bit of an ego, but I feel like I can handle my interactions with him because I have an understanding of how he works.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I wanted to talk about next. And keep in mind, neither of us are professionals or psychologists.
I am not a licensed therapist.
No, we are not a licensed therapist.
I have not. I've taken some psychology classes, but
I've never
done well.
I've never even taken a psychology class. I've been in therapy and I've watched TikToks about narcissism. But just, it's interesting, I think, the more that people can educate themselves about narcissists, and the more I've educated myself on narcissism, the more the mechanics make sense to me, and I can kind of see, like, how they operate, and it's just very interesting to me, I think.
Well, and I think that's a similar journey for me as well. You know, like, this all happened in 2016. I don't think that I've really accepted or, like, agreed with the fact that my dad has a personality disorder or just some sort of lack of moral compass. You know, intrinsically, until, you know, a couple years ago. And I think for me, you know, part of it was, you know, having that family therapist who said, you know, this was an abusive situation, you know, the speculation that my dad was a psychopath, it was really jarring at first. And I even said, I don't know that that's true. That feels really extreme.
Yeah.
And then on my mission, seeing, oh, yeah, no, that was definitely an abusive relationship. Again, I don't know that my dad's, you know, a psychopath or anything like that. And then realizing, you know, my dad had to have, I think, some sort of mental shortcoming in order to be as callous as he was with other people's, you know, livelihoods. And honestly, their ability to care for themselves, a lot of these people. You know, it wasn't just, you know, rich people, you know, it wasn't like a Robin Hood type thing. It was orphans and disabled people. It was not, there's no way of justifying it. He was cruel.
Yeah.
And so I had that, and then I had a lesson actually at church, which I think should happen a lot more often.
I agree. I 100% agree.
I could go on and on about that forever, but we had a woman come who served in an organization educating women about abusive relationships. And I think that was where I first heard the term gaslight, and I was like, oh my gosh, that makes sense.
You're like, I resonate with this.
Right? Some of these other things, I was like, oh. And it was supposed to be like, you know, it was a singles word. So it's supposed to be from the attitude of, like, making educated decisions in dating. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is my family. Like, not that that's a great thing, but it helped me, I think, have more context.
Yeah.
And then from there, it's just, you know, kind of been an ongoing journey, like you said, of, like, podcasts and books and different things like that, of just trying to understand, I don't know, I don't want to say, like, trying to understand my dad, but trying to understand maybe what would lead him to make those choices and just cause so much harm and have so little respect or understanding for the harm that he's caused.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I think there's, like, one of the biggest misconceptions, I think, between, like, a narcissist and a selfish person or I guess there's a big difference between a narcissist and just like a selfish person. Mm-hmm. And I think that's like I think narcissism is thrown around a lot. People are like, oh, if somebody's like selfish.
Well, I went to a book club at one point, and one of the woman's husbands was a therapist. And so she was saying how irritating it is to her how every woman who's divorced calls their ex-spouse a narcissist.
Yeah.
And she's like, she said she's hesitant to call anybody a narcissist who hasn't been formally diagnosed. And I think that there's some validity to that.
Yeah.
But most narcissists aren't going to go pursuing a diagnosis.
No.
They don't have that awareness in order to say, I'm the problem. There's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
It's all about what everybody else can do to serve them.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and I was listening to a book recently. I can't remember what it's called, but it's basically about highly empathetic people and their narcissists kind of prey on them.
Yes.
And how narcissistic personality disorder exists on a spectrum. There's people who are just show a few traits, and there's people who are like diagnosable narcissists.
Yeah.
And I think we all have some narcissistic qualities. Most of us have some self-preservation or selfishness where we do, in a way, prioritize ourselves. But I think the difference is just the callousness and that it's a regular behavior. It's not like here and there. It's all the time. It's about me.
Yeah. What would you say are some other, characteristics of a narcissist when you think of a narcissist?
I think a lot of it is... I'm trying to think how to phrase this. They need their egos fed. And so, from my reading, it comes from a lack of their appreciation. Like, they have some insecurities that they're incapable of filling themselves.
Yeah.
And so they need everybody else to fill it for them. And, for some people it starts in childhood where, their parents neglect them and abuse them, or where they get the other end of the spectrum and they can do no wrong. And their parents enable all their behaviors, and they're looking for the chase of that validation from other people, and they're just doing it in all the wrong ways.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know, I'm trying to think what else. The world revolves around them. Like, it's just, and the rules don't apply to them. They're just, it's that grandiosity, they're godlike. They're so wonderful and amazing.
Yeah, I think that's the difference too, because there's a difference between like the confidence that people have, and like with narcissists, like you said, like they are like God in their eyes.
Well, they're infallible.
Infallible, completely.
So anything that was not great in my family life growing up, it was never my dad's fault. It was always my mom's. Mm-hmm. Regardless of what my mom had to do with it or not. My dad would make decisions. My mom would say, that's a stupid decision. Why are you doing that? And he'd still find some way to turn it around when it turned out the exact way that my mom told him it was going to turn out and make it her fault. Yeah. It just, my mom just says all the time, it was just crazy making. It's, just that gaslighting, that, just that personal attack all the time.
Yeah, I think as soon as you said, just complete lack of accountability is a huge one, and I think a huge red flag to look out for just in general with people. But no matter what happened in our relationship, absolutely nothing was his fault ever. It was always my fault. He would cheat on me and it would be my fault. He'd have a bad day, or he'd get in a fight with someone and it was my fault. I wasn't a good enough wife, or like whatever it was. Everything was always my fault. And there was like, no matter what happened, and it got to the point where it was so frustrating, and it was like I was always the one ended up apologizing to him for his misbehavior.
Mm-hmm. I think it's really interesting that you say that too, because my dad was never home.
Yeah.
And my mom really withdrew from my dad many years before they divorced. My parents fought regularly. But even in high school, I think my mom was at her wit's end. She treated my dad honestly the way that I treat him now, where you just don't feed in.
Yeah.
And her attitude was just, she was going to push through until the kids were raised, and that was when she was going to divorce my dad. And she'd, finally had enough in 2016 when she was going to file for divorce. And it was, what did you say again? You said something that made me think of this. What did you say again?
Just a lack of accountability. Everything was always my fault. I was always the one apologizing.
Yes. And so, my mom withdrew years and years from my dad before they actually got divorced. And my dad's advice to me, as I'm getting married and having, starting my own family, is that my husband needs to be my priority over my children. And, that my mom, in some ways, was the ruin of my parents' relationship because she was so cold to him and withdrew from him, after years of abuse, Dad. It's...
Interesting.
It's still somehow he finds a way to make it my mom's fault. And I'm like, that's not how it was, Dad.
Yeah.
It just is really funny.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge when I think of narcissism. Why? I'm having such a hard time saying that word today. Narcissism, narcissists. That's what I think of as a lack of accountability. And like you already said, a lack of empathy for sure. Just know.
You know what we should do? So we should pull up the diagnostic manual and we can just read off the
Let's do it. I love it. I just wrote down things that I could think of and then Googled traits of narcissists. I think this is a great idea.
Okay. So here we go. From the DSM. Oh, this is the DSM-4. Do I have the DSM-5? Is it crazy that I know what each version is?
No. Do you want to explain what the DSM is while you're looking it up?
The DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. The most recent version is the DSM-5.
Okay.
So I have found it. It says, narcissistic personality disorder is defined as having a pervasive pattern of grandiosity in fantasy or behavior, a constant need for admiration, and a lack of empathy, beginning by early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts, as indicated by the presence of at least 5 of the following 9 criteria.
Okay.
First one is a grandiose sense of self-importance. Number 2 is a preoccupation with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love.
Yeah.
3 is a belief that he or she is special and unique and can only be understood by or should associate with other special or high-status people or institutions. An excessive need for admiration, a sense of entitlement, interpersonally exploitive behavior, a lack of empathy, envy of others, or a belief that others are envious of him or her.
It's just so funny listening to these. It's check.
That's what I'm saying. I do it with my dad, and I'm like, oh, he meets that one.
Yeah.
Oh, he meets that one.
Yeah.
And there's actually a lot of overlap between the psychopathy they call now antisocial personality disorder. There's a lot of overlap. I think the difference between a psychopath and a narcissist is that narcissists have an understanding of what those empathetic feelings should be.
Yeah.
And psychopaths do not.
Yeah,
they're not
psychopaths
even capable of faking it.
Yeah, they don't even have any kind of feeling at all.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's see. Is that 9? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Oh, that is 9. That's all of them. Oh, wait, here we go. Sorry. Lack of empathy, envy of others, or a belief that others are envious of him or her, and I just missed the last one. The last one is a demonstration of arrogant and haughty behaviors or attitudes.
Arrogant or haughty behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
Mackenzie,
Yes.
did you witness any of these in your dad?
Well, there was the grandiose sense of self-importance,
Yeah.
right? I don't know that I would say, like, preoccupation with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love. But my dad just wanted to be the best at everything, but wasn't willing to put in the work to be the best at everything.
Yeah.
It's just
Sounds
really funny.
familiar.
It's
It
just
sounds
really
familiar.
funny.
Yeah.
Because you would think, like, if you want to become an expert in your field,
Yeah.
you should do the education and training that enables you to be an expert in your field.
Mhm.
My dad didn't do any of that. He just thought, you know, it should be handed to him on a silver platter.
Yeah.
Which goes with, where is that? There's something like that. Oh, a belief that he or she is special and unique, you know, and that he should have whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever they wanted. Which I think kind of fits hand in hand with my dad's prophetic visions. You know, he believed he was more important than everybody else because he had, you know, I think he was manufacturing these so-called special experiences to put himself above others so he could associate with other
special people.
I mean, like I said, my dad just said that, you know, he needed my mom to be more devoted to him, like, in every word and deed and action, I think is what he's really, you know, saying for sense of entitlement, you know, check, check, check. I think my dad was interpersonally exploitive. You know, I've seen that with me and my siblings, right, where it's, I wouldn't say necessarily like the pitting of us against each other, but it's, you know, the pitting of us against my mom, or just the manipulation of all of us in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
You know, I think that should count as interpersonally exploitive behavior. Lack of empathy. You know, like I said, my dad has never once really said he was genuinely sorry. You know, not even to just, like, his victims. I'm like, you know, I think maybe your family deserves an apology. My dad has never once said, I'm sorry that your life was an entire lie. I'm sorry that, you know, you had to deal with all the consequences of my choices. That must have been really hard as a 19-year-old to have to deal with that. You know, that would be really great. You know, I don't ever expect to get an apology for my dad. I think if he did, you know, that would be the day that hell freezes over. But I think just an acknowledgement of the harm that he's caused and not glossing over it would be really nice. He's not capable of that.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. They're not even capable of it. Acknowledgement.
Yeah, they're not. You know, my dad, you know, because we grew up religious, you know, he sat as a missionary. He taught the gospel of Jesus Christ. You know, it's faith, repentance, restitution. You know, you have all of these things that encompass actual repentance. My dad can't even acknowledge he's done wrong. And yet he's over here, I've been saved. God is so miraculous and wonderful, which, you know, that's great. But you can't even acknowledge what you've done is wrong beyond empty platitudes. It's just hilarious. And, you know, he thinks he's been, you know, forgiven and everything's behind him. And maybe it is. I don't know. I don't pretend to know the mysteries of life.
Yeah.
But to me, I think that there's some, I don't want to say some work, but just some genuine remorse that's lacking.
Yeah.
For his actions.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, just hilarious. Not really hilarious, but just like, it's just mind-boggling. It's like you just, you know, at a certain point, you just shake your head. Like, it's just nonsense.
Yeah, for me, it's just crazy to even picture thinking the way that they do. Like, I can't even wrap my mind around being so, like you said, so cruel and so harsh and so unempathetic. Like, it's so foreign to me to even, like, the things that he would say to me. I was like, I can't even imagine thinking that way.
Oh yeah, it's just totally backwards and insane. You know, with my dad, it's a lot of backhanded critiques. You know, like my most recent letter from him was that I'm almost a perfect daughter, but I have these flaws. Like, thanks. You know, it's I really appreciate, you know, the pot calling the kettle black here, Dad.
Yeah.
You know, it's just so, you know, I think my brain doesn't work like that, and I think, you know, part of that is just, you know, you realize too that your morals are not necessarily the same morals everybody else has or was raised with. And I think it's actually kind of funny that I have ended up, I don't want to say like so moral and principled, but I think I have a generally very set code of ethics for myself.
Yeah.
And it just, you know, my dad's over here critiquing me.
Yeah.
As he sits in prison.
Yeah. It is very ironic. It is very ironic.
It's entertaining.
Yeah. And it kind of helps me a little bit too, realizing like that the things that were going through his head are not the way that I think. Like and it kind of helps me take myself out of the situation and be like, you know, this isn't personal to me. This is just how he thinks, and he doesn't think the same way that I do.
Right.
And so the actions that he did, it kind of helps me to disassociate myself from those specific actions, because I can be like, you know what, if I was in that situation, I wouldn't have acted that way. And so I don't have to think of it as like a normal person treating me as terribly as he did. And that helps me a lot to kind of like to pull away from him and to like lose that emotional connection to him, because I realized he doesn't think the same way that I do. He doesn't feel the same way about this relationship that I do. Like, this is not a genuine relationship, because the view that we just have for each other was just so different.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, just because it's almost like a reflection of themselves. They have these insecurities, and so they project them onto you, and it has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with them.
Yeah.
And their, you know, lack of ability to make anything not a personal attack.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting, like, the more I, like, look back on my relationship, the more I can, like, the times that were really hard and he was, like, being really harsh on me, and I'm like, oh, that's because he was, like, feeling insecure about himself, or, like, he knew he was doing something wrong and was taking it out on me and, like, making it seem like I was the worst person, and, like exactly like you said, projecting all of those things onto me, because he couldn't, in his mind, come to terms with the fact that he is the problem. And so it always has to be somebody else who's the problem. And then they make up crazy things.
Right. They're not capable of ownership for themselves or
their
actions.
Or inward reflection at all.
Not at all.
Yeah. It probably would terrify them to have to try and, even if they were capable of inward reflection, it would probably, they'd be too scared to actually look at themselves. Yeah.
I know. I think about that, you know, all the time with my dad. Is like, if he ever really took accountability, would he even be capable of doing that without having a psychotic break?
Yeah.
Because his actions were so far-reaching. I think if he ever had a really frank self-inventory, it would be incredibly difficult.
Yeah. And just, like, life ending. Like, I feel like in the case of Justin, like, the fact, because I'm not even the only one that he's abused in his life, you know? Like, he would have to take inventory of every single relationship he's ever been in, and with his family, girlfriends, friends, you know, whatever. And
because it's never an isolated incident. It's
never
just you.
No, never.
It's not even just romantic relationships,
no.
like you said. It's every facet of his life.
Yeah. So it's interesting to think about that too. Like if they ever did have to have like a sort of self-inventory, it would be very interesting to watch a narcissist have an actual like mental breakthrough, which is not possible, like we said.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because there are some narcissists who do seek out therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's never, like, they're never going to be cured, but they can learn to function in society in a, I don't know that I want to say like a super healthy manner, but I think at least, you know, a mostly healthy manner.
Yeah.
And again, I think it goes back to that spectrum of narcissists. You know, I think people who are lower on the spectrum have more of an opportunity to really change or at least have different behaviors than what they're used to.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think like you said, I don't know that the way that their brains function would ever change, but maybe they could be like, I don't know, have you seen that guy like Lee Hammock on
TikTok? The narcissist.
Yeah,
who talks
like
about narcissistic
yeah, like
behavior.
the self-aware narcissist.
Mm-hmm.
And he's even said this too, where he's like, my brain is never going to change. The way that I approach life is not going to change. But he's like, and he's been in psychotherapy for years.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, I can now recognize that this is what my brain is doing, and then I can kind of process what to do from there. But he's like, those reactions that I have, like those gut instincts, are never going to change, and they're never going to go away. And he's just like, I mean, a miraculous one in a bajillion people who are actually going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember like seeing those videos too and being like, oh, there's hope.
Yeah.
That they're going to change. Absolutely not. And he talks about that too, where he's like, I'm a very unique situation.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think just like you said, they have probably the potential, depending on where they are on the spectrum, but that I mean, I wouldn't bet anything on if I went back to the relationship and was like, oh, there's like a chance that he could change. Like I would never bet that.
No, I think it's too hard to. Well, I like that guy on TikTok too. I love just his frankness and his approach to it. Just as we were talking about it, I remember seeing a video of him talking about, you know, relationships of, you know, abuse. And some of these extreme narcissists, their attitude is that if they can't have you, no one will, which is where it gets very dangerous and very scary.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and I had lots of women I've crossed paths with, especially on my mission, who were in abusive relationships or in the process of leaving, and it's very scary. And you know, kind of nodding back to your podcast episode with Nicole, it's hard to judge or understand the situation until you've been in it or taken the time to really understand it. Because I used to think that about my mom. Like, you were unhappy. My parents were married for, I think, over 30 years.
Yeah.
She was unhappy, I think, pretty much from day one.
Yeah.
And so it was, why did you put up with your own unhappiness for 30 years? Why did you, I don't want to, like, say subject us to my dad, but in a way, kind of, you know? And I realized that my dad had just totally manipulated my mom into thinking she couldn't. And my mom is a very moral and principled person, and so she was going to stick it out until the bitter end, until she literally couldn't anymore. Mm-hmm. And in the end, it was to her detriment.
Mm-hmm. Which it usually is.
Oh, yeah. You know, it's unfortunate, but at the same time, I'm glad that she's no longer in that situation, too. You know, it was not the nicest way to, you know, end their marriage, but at least it's over.
Yeah, and she just had to kind of do what she had to do to get out of the situation, right? And try and protect you guys as much as she could.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's hard, and I just think so important to have these conversations and for people to realize, kind of, again, like with my conversation with Nicole, kind of an insider's view into these kind of relationships. Because like you said, people, it's so hard to look at it from the outside and not judge it. And I mean, I never knew anybody personally who had been in an abusive relationship until I was in a relationship. But I had like heard stories, or, you know, you'd see movies or you'd see things and you were like, why don't you just leave? Like, it's so easy, like, just leave. And so I think these kind of conversations are really important to kind of educate people and give a little more grace and tolerance to people in those relationships, and realize that there is such an emotional entanglement going on behind the scenes that you probably don't even know about, and that it's a lot more difficult than it seems on the outside, and it's not a normal relationship dynamic. So for people who have never been in that relationship dynamic and they were just like having struggles and going through like a normal like relationship breakup, you can look at somebody in an abusive relationship and be like, why don't you just do that? Like, why don't you just, you know, break up or like get divorced? Like, it's not that hard. And people just don't realize the relationship dynamic. So thank you for being willing to come on here and talk.
I have a question for you, though, real fast.
Ask me. Let's go.
If you could change one thing to make more people just, I guess, aware of narcissism, or I guess about how to approach situations, what would you change?
That's such a good question.
What action would you take?
Personally, in my life, I wish I would have had education on abuse prior to being in an abusive relationship. I knew absolutely nothing about the cycle of abuse, about narcissism, about gaslighting, about love bombing, about any of those things. I didn't even know those terms until I was in therapy from like talking about my relationship. So I think whether that's in, and I mean, I can't speak for everybody in saying that I would want them to teach it in church, because not everybody goes to church. I would wish that they would educate people in school.
I think it could come from multiple directions, because that's what I would say too.
Yeah.
As I think education is the greatest resource that we have available to prevent ourselves from being abused, or helping us to recognize abusive situations when we're in them. And actually, you know, we've had some situations here in Utah with abusive families where they've, you know, become family annihilators and killed their whole families.
Yeah.
Fun fact, national statistics for domestic violence are 1 in 4 women over the course of their lifetime will be in a domestic violence situation. In Utah, it's closer to 1 in 3.
Yeah.
It's incredibly disappointing, and I think a lot of that is just the culture that we have, and I think some of it could be prevented. I think if we taught it in schools, I do think it should be taught in church. I think coming at it from multiple directions would just benefit women so much, you know, and not even just women. You know, I think all sorts of people are in abusive relationships, whether that's a man or a woman, and it just talking about it and educating ourselves on it would help so much.
Yeah, I agree, because I think if I would have been informed about these things, I would have avoided the relationship altogether. But just because I was so naive and I literally didn't know any better, that I just didn't, you know, I didn't avoid it because I didn't know what it was, and I just like went straight into it. And so I think, and on the opposite side of leaving the relationship, the more I've educated myself about abuse and about narcissism and whatever, the less it's been likely that I'm going to go back. And that was something that my therapist really hounded with me. It was like, educate yourself, learn about this, like, as much as you can, you know. And it helped me leave the relationship too. And so I think even if there is education, people are still going to probably fall into
it's so easy at first.
It is, yes. So I think people are still going to fall into those relationship dynamics, but I think the more information we can get out there, the better chance people will have even to leave again from a relationship, and even if they do fall into it with education. So I think when I share this episode, and you can give me some things too, I can share some resources with people, and I've shared some like TikTok accounts and Instagram accounts and different things on my personal Instagram before about abuse, but I think we can put some more info out there for people that are interested.
Yeah, sounds great.
Yeah. Is there anything else any last words, Mackenzie?
No.
This has been a really good conversation. Thank you for coming on. We've been talking for almost an hour and a half. So
I'm sorry.
No, it's perfect. I'm so grateful that you could be here. It's been such a good conversation. So thank you for
having me.
Yeah, thank you for being willing to be vulnerable and open about your family and your dad, and I know that's not super easy to do, so thank you.
Thank you.
I love you very much.
I love you too.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Absolutely Me. Thank you to everyone who helped make this possible. Shout out to Tanner Johnson for the amazing intro. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, review, tell all your friends. And we'll be back next Friday with another episode. Love you. Bye.